CardGamesTV1 Podcast. The state of Yu-Gi-Oh! The meta of Yu-Gi-Oh! Does meta matter? What's better, Rogue versus meta? I guess that's what I'll talk about. Rogue versus meta. So, probably going to be talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! For a while. I already did a lot when it came to Dragon Ball Super. Not much to say except whatever pops into my head, right? But right now, thinking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Noticing that a lot of the game is extremely boring. A lot of the new archetypes, not impressed by. They're alright in the fact that they're different, but they're just too different, I guess. As in, when I look at them, I'm like, is this supposed to be Yu-Gi-Oh? Right? Is this supposed to be, the game? The way Yu-Gi-Oh used to be, it was the high card concept, right? High card wins. Is that a mother effing deer? Jesus. It's either a deer or the red fox. Yeah, that's a deer. That was a deer. Okay, anyway, I'm out here in nature. I just saw a deer. Alright. Anyway, so in any card game, rogue decks have always been the best decks anyway. And that's something always to keep in mind, that a lot of the meta decks tend to get inspired or created, by our rogue players. Right? Somebody has to build these decks. Somebody has to come up with these ideas. Somebody has to figure out the synergy with certain cards. But what's also ironic is, even though we have stuff like archetypes, people are supposed to still, even if you play an archetype, still supposed to be like, okay, every other archetype, they gotta have weaknesses. So try to figure out their weaknesses. Now, I'm not saying people aren't necessarily doing that. Some people are. Obviously, that's why some people have side decks to help them beat certain decks. But a lot of times, most people try to figure out how to beat certain decks with hand traps, or just making essentially an unbreakable board. Which I'm not, against it, considering the fact that I used to do the whole unbreakable board thing. Now I just mainly do board breaking because everybody else is doing unbreakable boards, right? So I'm mainly just doing board breaking. I do pivot. I do go from one strategy to another. I try to make sure that my decks can adapt. So even if most of my decks are geared towards going second, I do have built-in ways of going first, right? Setting up a board going first, just to slow my opponent down enough so I can survive them going second, right? And then probably establish a board afterwards, and then they end their turn with a strong board. Then it's my turn, and then I break their board. Just because, my decks are designed for board breaking. But if I go first, then, board breaking is not that useful, right? So I'm gonna have to set up some type of defense. That's why inherently the main hand trap I use in all my decks is Battle Fader, because if I go first and there's not much for me to do going first, then since my decks are mainly board breaking decks, board breaking OTK, got to point out that there is a win con OTK, then I need to make sure that I can survive ending my turn. So if I go first, I'm like, yeah, there's nothing for me to play. I have this MST, but it's only useful going second. So I'm gonna set it just in case, just so it looks like I got a Mirror Force or something, right? Make it look like I got a trap when I really don't. And then end my turn. Now the trap that I would have would more likely be a Battle Fader. So there you go. So I got one hand trap and an MST. That right there would be my first turn board, right? Doesn't sound that special, but since you survive, it is pretty special. But of course, you might think, logically anyway, but what if somebody starts putting up like multiple negates and stuff? Like, well, if they got multiple negates, or at least something that can negate Battle Fader, all right, well, they got that. Right? They got that. Hopefully they put enough on board to kill me that turn. But most people who have like those, decks where they put up multiple negates, they don't always have their multiple negates don't mathematically add up to like an OTK. It should. That way you clearly have a going first strategy and a going second strategy. Because going second and going off and establishing a board should allow you to OTK. Like, that's the thing. You should have both, right? Your deck should be able to set up a turn one board, but also be able to go, have a OTK going second, right? And it should be one and the same. Like, the exact same strategy should be your win con. Like, imagine a Quasar. So you have a Quasar OTK deck. You could just wait until you go second and then, drop Quasar and OTK opponent. Or if you go first, drop Quasar anyway and use them to defend yourself going first, right? And then on the next turn, on your second turn, then go for game. That kind of stuff. So these are the kind of things that I think about and try to focus on when I play. I want to make sure that regardless if I go first or second, I have something. There's something I can do. Sometimes I'll, like I said, I'll set some spells and traps. Like if I have 2 MSTs, I'll set them. And I'll set a monster that I probably don't need. And that's it. And that'll look like some type of board, even though it's not much of anything. But my opponent doesn't know that, and that's the whole point. Taking advantage of my opponent not knowing. And then since they're guessing, that's where the whole mind games stuff comes in. And, whenever they do something, I'll look at my face down MSTs and make it seem like I have a response, but when I don't, and I'll be like, all right. Yeah. No response. Keep going. No response. But I want to put that doubt in their head. I want to put that idea in their head that I might have a response. I'm just waiting, or I didn't meet the conditions for my response. But in reality, I have nothing. But then they end their turn. Let's say they set some cards and they end their turn. It's like, all right, end phase, then dump my MST their back row, right? If they have any, which more likely they would, and there'll probably be floodgates. So end phase, popping their floodgates would be nice. And then on my turn, I could just start, playing. Especially if they didn't do much of anything on their turn. Then I'll just take advantage of the fact that my fake board was enough to slow them down, which gave me a fighting chance. And I tend to do that a lot. So it tends to be very beneficial. I do that on Edo Pro, I do that in real life, and it works pretty consistently. There are the rare occasions where somebody don't know no better, right? They don't know that they should be cautious about my face down cards, and then they'll just play stuff and attack and do stuff and act as if I have nothing on board. You're like, okay, that could be a problem if I did have responses, but since I don't, lucky you call my bluff, as it were. But sometimes some people just don't know. Sometimes ignorance can be bliss, right? Not knowing that they should be cautious about my face down cards can actually be a benefit, but not typically a benefit, but it can be. So that's something always take into account. But yeah, I be thinking about that a lot, about what synergy can I create with the cards that I choose to be able to establish a board going first, but still have the ability to do stuff going second. So So that way, if I end up against a strong strategy that makes it hard to play the game, I'll be able to deal with it. Now, currently I play Kaiju Time Lords. It's very good, very consistent, but it is heavily reliant on my opponent playing monsters. So if my opponent's not playing monsters, and so I would struggle, not 100%, but I would struggle against Mystic Mind Burn. But I do have a main deck way of dealing with Mystic Mind Burn, so it's just a matter of setting it up as quickly as possible to start preventing the burn. So I do have a main deck way of dealing with Mystic Mind Burn. So that's a thing. I do essentially have a way of dealing with Mystic Mind itself. I have a couple ways of dealing with Mystic Mind. I do have ways to deal with back row heavy decks. So I have options. So I try to make sure my deck is as prepared as it can be for whatever deck I go up against. I went up against a lot of the newer decks, Flunderies. I got used to beating them. The Terlaments, beating them. I've beaten Sprites, whatever. Beat them, and I played against some hero decks that I beat. Those tend to be easy. I beat them so many times that even with the new support, I still beat them. Anyway, whatever people are playing, I beat it regardless. It's just those are there are rare occasions where it is hard to beat certain things just because there might be some synergy. Like there's some decks that like the Terlament's a little bit tough because even if I kaiju something, effects will trigger off and all this other extra stuff start happening, and then just a lot just a lot happens. Like some of these archetypes just have a lot of effects that trigger multiple times, triggering off of each other, chaining, so it makes it hard to trying to counter with a Song Strike or something some of these decks because of all the effects chaining and activating all at once. So basically chain blocking tends to happen a lot, so it makes it hard to respond. And then of course when you're playing with a time limit, some of these decks take a long time to resolve effects. So since it takes long to resolve effects, you end up having less time to play the game than your opponent, because your opponent is taking up so much time because of the deck they're playing. And we all have to agree that that's bullshit. But these card game companies, like Konami for example, do allow these decks to exist, allow these effects to exist. You'd think they would take time into account and try to make it where it doesn't take that much time to play a deck. But I've been seeing that they literally try to cater to combo players, right? Not realizing that combo players, part of the popularity why people started playing combos wasn't for, the main reason people play combo is because it takes long. Most people deliberately play long, exaggerated combos that take long, that take so many steps to complete, because they're trying to waste time on purpose. And then ideally they want some form of win con to be the final result of all that time they wasted. So that way they waste a lot of time and then put up a win con or some type of strategy that can help them win. And then they're trying to rely on both things to be in their favor, which is time is running out in the game, in the match, and they have a strategy, and more likely a multiple negate strategy, or maybe an OTK, right? So they're trying to take advantage of certain aspects of the game to try to get that edge to help them win, even though and the main thing is just it takes skill out the game, because there is no back and forth between you and your opponent. You make some plays, your opponent makes some plays, and y'all go back and forth battling like the way it should be. But instead now it's just I'm gonna waste 30 minutes on my turn playing a whole bunch of cards and effects, and then put up a board with multiple negates, and then end my turn. And then it's like my opponent has very little time left to play, and when they try to play, I must just start negating shit, further wasting time, making it hard for them to play, and then just win through that. Either win because of time and me having more life than my opponent, or all that extra stuff. So a lot of bullshit, but it is the competitive scene, so you gotta understand that that's just how it is. So, but anyway, that's where it's kind of ironic, where like a lot of rogue decks originally were a little bit like that. Like they were largely combo decks. They were able to do stuff that other decks normally couldn't do. But most rogue decks weren't too complicated. They were simple and straightforward, and they made for good anti-meta decks, obviously, but not many people like to use them. People rather just focus on the easy to play meta decks. But now Rogue became meta, which is the point I was trying to make, is like Rogue essentially became meta. So the idea of playing a deck that has a elaborate combo to end up having a certain win condition. Because before it was about playing decks that were easy and fast and consistent. Now it's about consistent time-wasting combos. Being able to consistently waste a large amount of time in a game to establish, some type of strategy. Whether it's a win con like an FTK or an OTK, or just put up multiple negates or interrupts just so you can, slow the game down even more and try to waste as much time as possible. That way every game is just about wasting time instead of about actually playing and trying to beat and outsmart your opponent. It's just literally about wasting time. It's about manipulating the time rules. It's about manipulating the mechanics of the game, abusing certain things. And then that's where you get the level of degenerations we have in the game, where the game becomes degenerate because of the players, not because of the game itself, not because the company creates cards that allow for degenerate strategies. Like, no, it's the players that choose and determine what degenerate strategy they're going to use, and then that's what they play, the degenerate strategy, because they're the ones that create it, right? They'll combine decks together, different engines and stuff, and that's their main thing, is combining engines. So they combine engines, put them together, and that's what they'll do. Just waste time. It's like, oh, I'll play this engine. Oh, you have ways to interrupt my engine? That's cool. I'll play another engine, and just keep on trying to waste as much time as possible. That's why people want stuff that, even when their opponent stops them with a hand trap, they want to keep going. It's like, oh, well, here's an extender. That's why we have the term extender. So here's an extender, a way to continue going off, continue playing my turn, instead of literally stopping. They just want to find any way to continue. So that's the kind of annoying things that, tends to annoy me, is seeing that type of downfall of the game, where players are not trying to get good, not trying to be good at the game. They're mainly focusing on trying to waste time. Because there was a time where people were looking for like OTKs, FTKs, any type of strategy that will help them win games more often than not, right? Consistency in fast games. So they're always looking for, OTKs, which made sense OTKs will release good generic cards that, if used right, can help them weaken their opponent so much that their opponent can't barely do anything, that they can take advantage of it. That's why we have back row, like traps and stuff. And if you use your traps right, you can have control of the board, and you can have control of the duel, which allowed you to, have the advantage. And the idea was to exploit the advantage when you had it, take advantage of it. It's like, finally, this is the perfect time for me to summon my boss monster and use it to win me the game, right? And that made sense. But now it's not even about that. Now people are not even trying to play out strong, cards, like strength-wise, to try to win them the game. Now it's just about summoning a whole bunch of little monsters and try to waste as much time as possible, activate as many effects as possible, and go from there. Just like I noticed that, yes, we can say that the company does give a lot of these cards multiple effects, give them way too many effects, and I agree with that, because it does make it where, people can do a lot when the effects of cards should be 1 to 2 sentences long. So that way it gives you an option. That way you can be like, oh, I could use this card, as opposed to like, oh my god, this card does so much. And then when people play it, it's like, oh, I could do this, oh, I could do this, I could combine it. And then they try to figure out different combinations of how they can use all these different effects together, right? Which further just takes long to play out a turn. It should be something as simple as, okay, you have a lot of monsters on your side of the field, and I have a card that can destroy all of them. All right, I'll play this card, destroy all of them, and that's it. And then play something else and keep it moving, keep the game going forward. Right? Simple. 1 sentence, 2 sentence effects need to make a comeback. We need to see more of that. Like, your deck shouldn't consist of like every card having, paragraphs or essays or encyclopedias worth of text on them. The text should be nice and simple and straightforward of what the card can do and what the card can't do. If you want to add restrictions, obviously, and then that's it, and leave it at that. And you could create a couple different cards that have these effects. That's the funny thing is, you have one card that could do 3 different things. They could be used in 3 different ways, and instead of doing that, you could have created 3 different cards, and each one has one of those effects. But instead, you want to put all those effects on one card. Oh well. And that's what creates some of the issues when a card gets popular. Like, oh, this is a really good card. Look at all these effects. Then you're inherently creating a scenario where people are going to abuse that card, use that card a lot, and that card's going to become popular. And then, it creates more degeneracy. Right? It creates the scenario where it's like, oh, people are going to keep chasing cards that have multiple effects, and they're going to stuff their decks full of cards that have multiple effects, which is further going to make games take longer because of multiple effects. So if somebody's playing a deck that has very few effects to activate per turn, especially if you have effects that activate every turn, so it's like every turn you can activate effects, right? If somebody who plays less effects, they'll be at a disadvantage against somebody who plays a lot of effects, because somebody who plays a lot of effects will waste a lot of time using those effects, while somebody who has less effects will use up less time, which means they're just giving their opponent more time, right? So it'll be hard for them. So somebody who has a lot of effects, it'll be hard to say they're slow playing, because they literally have the ability, because of the cards, to literally take as long as they're taking for their turn. But somebody who has less effects on their cards don't have that excuse. So if they're taking long, you can call them out on slow playing, and that's an unfortunate thing. So somebody could legitimately take long on their turn because of all the effects they have, but then slow play on top of that, further making things problematic. But because they had a whole bunch of effects that legitimately allowed them to waste a lot of time, it's hard to call them out on slow playing. But somebody who has less effects, it's easier to call them out on slow playing. And then, and that's further giving an advantage to people who use a lot of effects, like cards that have a lot of text versus people who don't. Another thing about cards having a lot of text is that if your opponent is like, oh, can I see the card? Now they gotta read all of that to try to figure out what your card does, and then depending on the wording and all that stuff, it's like when and if you may, or like they gotta break down the English mother effing language just to try to understand what your card can and can't do, in order for them to make decisions of what they can and can't do, and that creates a problem. It's bad enough that you taking long because you have these cards with encyclopedia worth of text on them. Then on top of that, now your opponent has to try to read it because they can't trust you to translate and give them a watered down version of what your card does, because you might leave some stuff out, which can be a huge difference between winning and losing, and all these extra factors. And then again, it's just the fact that you have to waste time reading, and then you have to try to comprehend, and then you have to start making decisions and trying to play and try to deal with the card and all this extra shit. It'd just be a lot simpler if card effects were made simpler. Keywords, having certain words that specifically states that refers to specific effects that everybody should be aware of and that plays the game, and then whatever extra text you need to add an extra use to the card, but not make the card do so much that it would take a long time. And then you have to think about memory. Like sometimes we as players got to memorize stuff. So I need to remember and know that what your card does. And if your card has, like I said, a long text box full of text, it's gonna be hard to remember that. It's easy to remember pot of greed, what pot of greed does, right? Draw 2 cards. Everybody should know that. But to literally have a whole bunch of cards where it's like it says so many different things, and it's like, okay, what does this card do? Creates a problem. Like I'm okay with like certain cards, like a boss monster, having a lot of effects, because it is a boss monster. That's the whole point. Once you play it, it's supposed to give you so many options, so much power. But not every card in your deck should have an encyclopedia worth of text on each card. That's just ridiculous. And I always never been a fan of that, of cards just having too much text. And sometimes you have an archetype that every card has the same text, so pretty much every card does the same thing except one extra additional effect, which to a certain degree, once you memorize the basic effect that all the cards have, it's not that big of a deal. And then you just have to memorize the individual one-off effects, so it's not too bad when it comes to that. But it's just the fact that it's like literally all of your cards do pretty much the same thing except one extra effect, so that's just funny. But it does work out for some archetypes. Some archetypes make sense having their effects set up that way. But ultimately, I miss the good old days, right, of people creating their own decks, people, trying to, play the game as opposed to trying to stop their opponent from playing the game, trying to waste time by taking too long to finish their turn and stuff like that, like all this degenerate stuff. And Konami's not exactly helping in that situation. They're definitely not helping reduce and prevent that possibility, that factor, that that people could do that, right? That stuff like that. They kind of try to, control that a little bit through ban lists, or like, oh, we'll ban this, we'll ban that, and try to make things fair and balanced. and less degenerate, but forget that the large majority of the community is degenerate, so they're going to find ways to make things degenerate anyway. So you can't fully get rid of degenerate play styles, mindsets, because it's a mindset. Players are the ones who choose what does and doesn't get played. But to a small degree, it is up to Konami to make sure that whenever they put out some new product, it just adds a little extra to the game, not drastically add so much to the game where it's like, ooh, here's another engine that is gonna take 24 hours to complete. Like, I always make that joke of like 12 hours later, right? My opponent's taking 12 hours to play a combo and end their board, right? End their turns, so that way I can play, like, because that's how it feels like, how long people take to play. Shit, I saw that on Duel Masters, which was even worse, because Duel Masters, I said Duel Masters, I meant Master Duels, different card game, Master Duels. Seeing a lot of the footage for it, it's like, damn, that shit taking forever, because they add all this animation, so that makes the game even slower, because everything has animation. So chaining cards have animations, and the list goes on. That's why I stay playing Edo Pro. I already get annoyed when my opponent takes too long on Edo Pro. And I've experienced like the Terrament deck, taking forever, where like I'm trying to play something, but I can't play nothing because I'm waiting for my opponent to make a response, to chain and resolve their effects, because they have a shit ton of effects to use. And it's like, that's some bullshit. Man, they're taking forever just to play. The thing I do like about Edo Pro that fixes that issue is the time limit. There's turn-based time limits. But not only turn-based time limits, but there's also time limits for both players. Each turn, both players have a time limit. So once my opponent, starts chaining things, starts to chain, a timer for them starts. And now they only have up to 3 minutes to resolve their chain. So if they end up wasting 3 minutes of my turn, right, taking long to resolve their chain, right, to say yes or no to whatever effects they are or are not going to do, finish selecting a card from the deck to add to the hand, whatever, right, whatever they're doing, if they're taking too long, well, they'll get punished for it. They'll lose the match, which is good, and it's the way it should be, because that right there is extreme slow playing. Like, you're slow playing, you're taking long, and there should be a punishment for it, because the idea is that we're supposed to be playing, and we should be trying to make it where people can play the game. The outcome, who wins, who loses, that'll be determined by us players, but the pace of the game should definitely be determined by the game. So that's why time needs to be a factor. It needs to be added into the game. That's definitely something I want to make more of a habit of, is having a timer. Right? Especially for best of, like for, I mentioned Dragon Ball Super. For Dragon Ball Super, I definitely want to make a habit, maybe even make an app for my phone. Maybe find one that already has this ability where I can set it up, for 30-minute time, for a 30-minute round, for example, but then set it where it'll make a noise every 3 minutes. That way we know that the turn's supposed to end, like 3 minutes is up, like I already, that kind of stuff, something of that nature. That way it'd be easier to determine if somebody, is slow playing or not. And the funny thing is, competitively, right, at tournaments, this can be incorporated. They do have timers. Usually they have a timer, like a big clock, that be like, all right, you guys got 45 minutes, and then they'll start the clock. So it wouldn't be that hard. They should be able to set it up where, every 3 minutes, it makes a sound, which is different from the sound it makes when the time is up for the whole entire 45 minutes, right? So that way everybody knows, like, oh, my turn ends, right? Got to end the turn or finish off whatever you're doing and then end your turn, because, you know, in case you're like in the combo step or something, but like end your turn so that way it can get to somebody else's turn. You know, to be fair, everybody needs to have the appropriate amount of time per turn to be able to play their turn. The fact that some people don't have time to play their turn because other people deliberately wasted it. And to me, that I can blame on Konami or any company that you know, supports, you know, competitive play, right? That it is on them to make sure that there is a time limit per turn, per game, right? For competitive play, because we shouldn't have it where people can exploit the fact that they can just take forever and then deliberately play decks that take forever to play, and then the companies definitely shouldn't be printing out, you know, archetypes that do that. I understand if somebody generically created a deck that takes long to play, and that's their whole strategy, is they created a deck that takes forever to play because all the cards in the deck has the ability to search out another card, and that card they search out has the ability to search out another card, so they could deliberately build a deck to deliberately waste time. I even had that idea for a deck. I'm gonna have to remember to work on it. I'll probably work on it today, and build a deck. Yeah, definitely eating that other donut. Anyway, an effect. Make a deck where deliberately the whole idea is to make it waste time. Oh, but it's gonna be for Dragon Ball Super. That's gonna be funny to make that a time burn deck. I think that's what I call it, time burn. I mean, I could do that for like Yu-Gi-Oh and other card games. Make it where the decks are designed to literally burn time, and of course have a, you know, a level of life gain and burn. So life gain, burn, and then a whole bunch of searching effects, shuffling effects. Right, just play a whole bunch of stuff that just takes time, and that's the whole point. That literally takes time, and just burn a whole bunch of time. And of course, I'm going to use a timer to time how long it takes per turn, because the idea is to make it very consistent. You know, if I have 30 minutes to play a game, I want to be able to waste like 10 minutes or at least 5 minutes a turn, something like that. Like I'll try to push it as far as I can. The idea is just to see how long can I make a turn last, as it were. The longer I can make it last, that's what she said, right? The better. And just see the full extent of that. Plus, it just proves a point that we need turn time, right? We need turns that have a time limit for turns, turn time limits, because no one should be able to waste 30 minutes when they on turn one. Like, that'd be bullshit. Turn one and you just start playing a whole bunch of stuff, start doing a whole bunch of stuff, and you just keep on going and going and going and going and going and going and going. Oh, and I could do it too. I could make decks like that just takes so long. I've had some decks that did take a long time to play, but I didn't like it, so you know, so I deliberately made it where I don't play decks that take long, you know, to play the turns. And you know, just because I'm that type of person. But I see a lot of other people don't feel that way. They don't feel like the game, they should play the game faster. They want to make the game take longer, and those are assholes. But anyway, I said enough about that. But rogue versus competitive, I just had a lot on my mind. Obviously, I didn't have anything specifically to talk about, except for all the stuff that I just said, it's stuff that I'm noticing in Yu-Gi-Oh, which I also notice is a problem in other card games that I play. But currently in Yu-Gi-Oh, I do see that a lot of players are, leaning towards manipulating time. So they're doing life gain and stuff like. So the funny thing, in Dragon Ball Super, a lot of people complain about the game becoming more like Yu-Gi-Oh, but from my point of view, since I play both games, I'm seeing Yu-Gi-Oh becoming more like Dragon Ball Super. So think about the irony in that. So obviously, each card game out there are influencing each other in different ways. I wouldn't be surprised because I never knew much for time rules when it came to Yu-Gi-Oh, but at some point they did start talking about time rules, and this was before Dragon Ball Super was even a thing. And then people started doing Cowboy for Game type stuff or Poison Old Man and stuff like that. But then everybody started getting into unbreakable board concepts, and then started doing the whole hand trap thing, and things just kept changing. And now we're back to the whole time rule game thing. So now people's strategy, degenerate strategy, is to waste time. That's an unfortunate thing. Like, the goal should be to play the game, win, right? Outsmart your opponent so that we could brag about being good at the game. You can't brag about being good at the game when you're not, right? When you don't do anything intellectual or skillful, where you're largely dependent on wasting time or rules and technicalities and stuff like that. Like, some people try to exploit card interactions, like certain rulings that make certain card interactions so powerful, and we're like, oh, let me exploit that. I want to abuse that. And that's where you get the degeneracy, because people choosing to do these things. I choose not to. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to play cards that have simple text, simple strategy, straightforward, combine cards so I can get different outcomes. Instead of having one card that does everything, I have different cards that do different things, and then combine them together to do different things. And I'd rather do it that way, right? It's like having a whole bunch of different colors to paint with, and then paint and create different things. I'd rather do that. I'd rather have different color paint, right? And then create different masterpieces. Create things that other people aren't creating. Do what other people aren't doing. Instead of just having one color to rule them all, basically. Where it's like, this one card does everything. No, where I have different cards that do everything, right? Every card does a different thing, but when I combine them, it's like I collected all the Infinity Stones, and now I can do a whole bunch of awesome shit. But people would just want the Infinity Stone to be printed on one card. Like, here's one card that can rule them all, right? This one card can do everything you can think of. And that's the end of the podcast.